This story belongs to a friend of mine. He told me this once, and I simply have to share it. My friend is of Wui-Queenux heritage, a Native American tribe who settled in the Pacific Northwest coast. He is quite a character. For one, he is a whopping 6'10", and has the blackest eyes that you could imagine. He always has this frowning face going on, which makes him even more intimidating. He is everything but a bad guy. In fact, he is the most gentle of giants. He was working at a gas station up in North back in 1992. He has pretty much always worked the graveyard shift, from 11 PM to 7 AM. Business wasn't exactly booming at nights, so he was usually watching TV or reading magazines between customers. And there were a few. This area he lived in and worked in was deeply associated with all things Native American. There was a potent sense of pride in the surrounding communities, but also a very distinct presence of superstition and old traditions. My friend was no exception. He was a firm believer in all things of the old. This made his encounter even more terrifying. One night, he was sitting as usual watching TV when a customer entered the gas station. The customer paid for his gas and a pack of smokes and some soda and returned to his car. Nothing unusual. But as my friend looked out the window towards the customer's car, he spotted what looked like a huge dog sitting by the edge of the woods. Now the window is located out on the side of the building, some distance from the sliding door, and overlooks the pumps and the roof covering it. On the sides of the roof, there are pretty strong halogen lights, which shine in to the gas station. This gives the gas station not only eerie lighting, with the blinds casting long, stripped shadows, but also blinds the teller to an extent. As he peered through the window trying to focus on the dog, it was gone. He didn't think much of it. Even if it were a wolf, he was inside and wolves don't tend to rob gas stations at night. Wolves were common here, but this wolf was huge. He brushed it off and returned to his mindless show on TV. A couple of hours go by, and not a single customer had entered since the last. He was about to refill some condiments when he heard a large thud coming from the back. It wasn't inside, but he could hear it. It came from the back, and behind the building they kept the garbage. The gas station has been visited before by scavenging homeless, but my friend didn't really care. It wasn't his garbage, and it was just garbage. Let them take it. But it kept getting noisier. He decided to grab a flashlight and a gun from the office and circle around the back to tell whoever was venturing there to leave. He had had enough. His presence alone would have scared off anyone, but he wanted to feel safe just in case. He exited through the sliding doors, walked past the window he was sitting by, and as he turned the corner, he shines his light towards the dumpster. As the cone of light hits the dumpster, my friend instantly drops the flashlight and the gun. It's the huge dog he saw before, scouring through the garbage. It wasn't a dog though. It clearly stood on its hind legs, reaching the same height as himself. It could not be a bear. It was too gaunt. The creature's eyes had been glowing in the light of the flashlight, making it even more terrifying. He ran inside the gas station, and he wasn't followed. He locked the door and stayed in the whole night, and quit the very next day. My friend is still convinced that he saw a Skinwalker, a shape-shifting shaman of sorts that are common occurrences in Native American lore and culture. I don't think he ever plans on working nights again.
Not long before the summer of 1996, my parents decided that I was going to summer camp. My input was not taken into account. I was overweight, becoming more so every day. They thought spending some time in the great outdoors was going to fix all of this. I did have one friend, Max. My parents convinced his mum and dad that Max should accompany me. Max was overweight like I was, and he hated the idea just as much as I did. We begged and moaned to our parents, but it didn't make a difference. Max's parents had a home in Val, and they decided to go on a camping trip in Colorado. Calling the camp rustic was a gross understatement. The cabins had no electricity or running water. The showers had to be used sparingly, and they weren't exactly hot. And the thing was, it was supposed to be at the discretion of the campers. I never understood this. The daily activities consisted of hiking, horseback riding, riflery, rock climbing, rappelling and water rafting. Normal activities for children, but I didn't like any of this. I was overweight. We stayed at Max's family home in Val for a few days before leaving towards the camp. We enrolled for a 3-week term, the shortest on offer. So for several days in Val, Max and I ate as if the world was ending. With any luck, we would come back to our parents only slightly less fat than before when they hatched the plan to begin with. So there we are, we just arrived at the camp, streamer trunks full of clothes and assorted equipment. We had some normal stuff, like backpacks, flashlights, canteen stuff, portable cookware, etc. Now to reach our cabins, we had to haul our trunks 1 mile up a hill. Now, we had no idea in advance just how bad that our accommodations were going to be. We were also practically in tears when we heard that we were only going to be allowed 1 care package during the 3-week term. Our first impressions were unsurprisingly that of a poor one. Max and I both recognised how pathetic our attitudes were eventually though. Our distress quickly disappeared. However, many of the kids in our cabin had similar tastes in music and movies, so we quickly become friends. Our counsellor was a stout hippie named Storm. I don't recall his age, he was likely in his mid-20s. He was a really nice guy, and we just all talked to him straight away. One of our bunkmates had a little more difficulty settling in. He was called Dustin. He was a runt, thin, pale, and sticky looking. We initially thought that he was just painfully shy and that he had some kind of anxiety, but thereafter we realised that he was just weird. He was glassy-eyed and almost looked otherworldly. We did try and connect with him initially, but eventually we just let him fade into the background. Now at night, we would lie in our beds and tell stories for about an hour or so before falling asleep. At this time, Dustin engaged in a weird routine. He would leave the cabin and go walking in the dark. The terrain was very diverse. There was lots of ditches that were actually a few feet deep. There were bear sightings every so often. Now I'm quite sure that there was no shortage of other weird creatures out there, and for some reason, Dustin had his best interest in roaming around there with them. None of these complications deterred him though. Oddly, Storm took no issue with it. "Do your thing, man," he would say to Dustin routinely. About a week or so into our 3-week term, we went on cabin campout. This consisted of an elder of the boys teaming up with the younger cabin. The age range was from 8 to 17 years old, hiking anywhere from 20 to 30 miles away from the cabin and then coming back. Storm was bouncing with the opportunity. He had the perfect spot. He went on to describe a valley that was absolutely bouncing with colours. There was loads of wildflowers everywhere, and it was just beautiful. He called it Horse Mountain. Now we're all fairly certain that this was a product of drug-induced fantasies, but Storm proved us all wrong when he led us to the exact location just like he described. We explored during the day, and at night time, we would huddle around a fire, eat dinner, tell ghost stories. On the 4th night, we implored Storm and Dave, the counsellor of the older boys' cabin who accompanied us, to tell us about Skinwalkers. For those of you who may be unaware, there is a legend that the spirits of deposed and murdered Native Americans would disguise themselves as animals and seek revenge by indiscriminately attacking anybody who come across their path. So these are Skinwalkers. The counsellors refused initially. The camp had apparently fielded numerous complaints from parents that younger campers were being scared to death by the ghost stories. Now eventually, Dave was the one who broke his silence. Our persistence had paid off. As he began his story, Dustin, maintaining his weird attitude, began standing up, walking around, and Storm called out to him, "Dude, would you at least take a lantern so we can see you?" Dustin obligated and slunk off. The little light from the lantern was becoming dimmer and dimmer as he made his way across the valley. Dave resumed the story. We sat there, mesmerised for what seemed like a very long time. We all sat there, both captivated and scared, till eventually the story came to a close. We just sat there in silence for a few more moments. Then, we talked for a while when Storm abruptly said, guys, where's Dustin?" We were so caught up in the story that we paid no attention to where Dustin was going. We looked in all directions but saw no tiny light jogging off in the distance. "Alright, he probably just turned off his lantern. Wait till he gets back up here," Dave reassured. So we waited for an hour, then another hour. Nothing. At this point, we broke into 3 groups. Max and I attached ourselves to Storm, and we set off down the valley. "I bet Sleepwalker got him," Max murmured. "Stop that," Storm snapped back. It was the first time I'd ever seen Storm say something like that. He'd never been foul before. At this moment, I realised that Dustin could be in serious trouble. We all looked throughout the night. A feeling of panic befell all of us as the sun began to rise. Storm and Dave argued. They should never allow Dustin to go off on his own. After some intense arguing back and forth, they decided that Dave would hike to go and get some help. We all sat there, in this terrifying silence, and we waited for his return. He come back hours later, with law enforcement and mountain rangers in tow. They asked us questions and then instructed us to return to the camp. When it got out how that they let him walk off unaccompanied, the ranger was disgusted. Another was in absolute rage. We then rode by van back to the camp. Storm was asked to leave. Now I don't know if he ever got into legal trouble, but our new counsellor Dave wouldn't say anything about what happened to him. Now 3 weeks passed and Dustin was not found. The authorities were able to track him up to a certain point, but then it vanished. I regretfully confess that things returned to normal for me and my bunkmates fairly quickly. We were remorseful that a kid our age was missing, but we felt little to no connection with him. We were compelled by the adults around us to try and forget about what was happening and enjoy the rest of the summer. Max and I enjoyed our time there so much that we asked if we could stay for another 3 weeks. Luckily, the camp had the space to accommodate us. Our parents were absolutely gobsmacked but overjoyed. So one day, I was playing football with Dave and got to a group of campers. There was a long field we used for sports which dipped down into a deep integration ditch which was 5 to 10 feet deep. Woods laid beyond that. There was not a cloud in the sky. Dave was a quarterback. He was crouched down ready to snap when suddenly he straightened up and squinted into the distance. "What the hell was that?" he muttered under his breath. "Hang back, guys," he commanded and began walking briskly towards the integrated ditch. We looked towards the woods and saw nothing odd. There was a strange dark colour mass waving at the edge of the ditch. It would kind of poke up for a second, then quickly dip back down the bank repeatedly. We really couldn't make out what this thing was. We then disobeyed Dave and made out after him. He stopped about 10 yards from the ditch. We went up to him. "Is that an animal?" the campers asked. "Guys, get away from here, that's not an animal." Slowly, the form revealed itself to be a person. It was on its hands and knees. Its back was arched and it had an attempt to stand up but fell straight down. Finally, it did stand upright. It swayed on weak legs. It was small, like a woman or child. It was completely covered in mud, presumably from trying to get up the bankment. "Oh my god," one of the campers whispered. It was Dustin. He was covered from head to toe in mud and blood. There was a gash on his forehead that extended from his temple nearly over to the other side of his head. I will never forget that haunting black silhouette against the backdrop of the clear blue sky. Aside from the gash on his head, all we could see was the white of his wide screaming eyes. Dave approached us. Dustin slowly extended a hand. As Dave touched his shoulder, Dustin let out an ungodly scream. He then collapsed on the ground, sobbing and screaming. "Go get help," Dave shouted. An ambulance rushed to the scene and later took Dustin to a nearby hospital. The camp staff were very secretive about the situation. We pled with them to tell us something, anything about what happened. He was a Mountain Dew junkie, so we piled him up with Mountain Dew, but he still wouldn't say. Suddenly, "Look," he said, and beckoned for all of us to sit around him. "I know what happened to Dustin. I won't lie, you know that. But if I could take back what happened, I would. It scares the hell out of me. I'm not going to share it with you. That's the end of." We felt the gravity of his words. We continued to talk about Dustin amongst ourselves, but stopped appealing to the adults. Initially, we were almost certain that it was something supernatural like a Skinwalker, perhaps. As time went on, Max and I consoled with each other the idea that Dustin may have been abducted. He lacked the supplements he needed to treat the water for gangrene and other stuff, so I doubt he was able to survive on his own. Did he stumble upon the wrong person, or wrong people by chance? Maybe somebody deliberately released him this way. I don't know. Max's mother knew Dustin's parents as they're all part of a small community in Val. Many years later, she told us in addition to suffering from shock, Dustin had severe burns on his body that doctors thought were the result of being doused with boiling water repeatedly. His appearance back at the camp 3 weeks later after his disappearance is also a mystery, but it also seems to point to the wickedness of others. Maybe he was returned to show us how bad he suffered. Over the years, Max and I remained friends and we returned to the subject at odd intervals. One time in high school, I brought up Dustin while having dinner with Max and his mother. She made an offhand comment about some people don't have the parental instinct. I pressured her about what she meant. She said Dustin had severe medical trauma and mental problems and his behaviour changed dramatically after the ordeal. His parents couldn't cope with the challenges of raising him and they abandoned him in a psychiatric ward. None of his old friends in Val had even contacted him or knew his whereabouts. If, dear reader, you're looking for closure, I can offer none. Certainly this is not a happy ending, but maybe it can be a teaching moment. I've told this story to dozens of people over the last 2 decades. They always point to the obvious desperate evil and depravity of Dustin's abductors. They never recognise what I consider to be the most disturbing element of this story. Dustin was discarded by the people closest to him, his parents, the counsellors, even us kids. He was odd, but not bothering with him made him even more vulnerable. Even with the noblest of intentions, complacency and distorance can put oneself and the others into the path of ruin. All it takes is a bit of indifference to lead the lamb to the slaughterer.
A Navajo tribal police officer was driving west on what used to be officially named Highway 666. It was lightly snowing, maybe 1/4 of an inch, which was a lot of snow for home, and he sees an old woman walking on the side of the road. How she got there or where she was going was not apparent, because she was so far into the middle of nowhere. He didn't see her right away, but as he passes he noticed that she's dressed in traditional clothing, a shawl, dress, and her hair is in the traditional bun. Not too odd. Many elders still choose to dress traditionally. But why was she out in such cold weather, and at this late at night? Hitchhiking maybe. He passed her too quickly, and now had to turn around. As he made a U-turn, he notices that she's nowhere to be seen. This is a fairly flat terrain, and he's sure that he's seen an old woman walking. He pulls the squad car over and steps out with a flashlight. Confused, he manages to find the woman's footprints in the shallow snow. He stops the footprints until they suddenly turn into what looks like dog footprints leading away from the road in a hurry. He immediately jumps back into the squad car and meets up with another officer near his patrol. He's a little shaken up, but asks the other officer if he's seen anything like that. The officer tells him that he has, and he also explains that sometimes it's an old woman, sometimes a very beautiful young girl, but always on the road and always in the snow, waiting for the right good Samaritan to let her in their car. I still get nervous driving up these wide open spaces at night. I keep my eyes strictly on the road and turn my music up high. I rarely pick up hitchhikers, but I never pick them up at night.
I've always been a bit of a skeptic, ever since I was a kid. Scary stories don't faze me. Horror games have never frightened me, and whenever I hear something weird at night, I instantly assume that it's something normal, just like an animal or something. Despite this, something very unsettling happened to me the other day, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. It's the first time in years that I've been genuinely frightened. So I live in a forested area in the US. Me and my girlfriend live in a large cabin there, and although there are many roads nearby, our nearest neighbourhood is at least 1 kilometre away. We also have 2 cats, one of which sleeps in the bedroom with us, while the other goes out at night and does whatever cats do when they're out of sight. Anyway, I like to stay up late at night and sleep late into the morning, whereas my girlfriend, she's an early bird. So anyway, it was about 1 in the morning. I was watching some crap on TV in the living room, whilst my girlfriend slept in the bedroom. I was beginning to grow tired when I heard something outside. Now it was pretty near to the cat flap. For clarity, our cat flap uses an electronic chip, so only our cats can use it. So I just assumed that it was one of the cats coming into our house. I ignored it, but then I heard it again. It sounded like something thudding against the flat. Now this happened a few more times before eventually I just lost my patience. I went straight up to go and open the door. Clearly, this stupid cat was having trouble trying to get in. I never really thought much of it at the time, but this was weird because we feed our cats well. They're very lean rather than chubby. So anyway, with this confusion in my head, I passed the bedroom and I peered in as I walked past. I wanted to see if my girlfriend heard the noises too. She was fast asleep, but the cat that sleeps with us was now staring out the window, wide awake. I called her name. Nothing. She just keeps staring. I shrugged it off and I kept heading towards the kitchen. To be honest, I was getting a little unnerved at this point. It didn't really make sense why my cat was looking out the window like that and also not responding to me. But I eventually reached the back door. There, I saw a dark shape through the translucent cat flap. I sighed, expecting the cat to be out there, and opened the door. It took a moment for the door to open, and I then saw the cat tense up as I opened the door. I opened up the door. I froze. It wasn't my cat. Whatever it was had started moving before I opened it, and I only caught a glimpse of a distorted figure. It was kinda like a tailless dog. Now, this thing was moving quick. Bolting, absolutely blazing out of there. I freaked out and slammed the door shut. What the hell was that? I wasn't sure. Then, my natural skepticism kicked in. I just assumed it was my other cat and I merely started laughing. Perhaps the darkness made it appear larger. Nevertheless, I was creeped out, but decided to go back to sleep. But as I slipped into bed, I realised something more horrifying. The second cat was asleep on the rug. It took me a long while to fall asleep that night. Everything seemed normal now. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Well, that was until a few hours later. I woke up to a strange feeling of dread. Something just wasn't right. My girlfriend was fast asleep. I held my breath. I then heard something creaking by the door. It sounded way too loud to be one of the cats. It was as if a person was walking about. I reached towards a bedside cabinet and flicked on the lamp. The room was now fully illuminated. I then saw something standing just outside the open door, staring right back at me. The same twisted figure that I spotted outside earlier. It wasn't very tall, maybe a little over 5 feet, but what was wrong with its face? That was what scared me the most. I only caught a glimpse of it, but what I saw is going to stay with me forever. It looked like a dog, but with an elongated face, almost human-like eyes. You know the weird distorted snow hounds pull when they pissed off? It was that expression. I instantly started yelling profanities as I scrambled backwards trying to straighten myself up. The creature then turned and sprinted down the hall. I heard it dash outside and go past the window behind us just above the headboard. I managed to look out as my girlfriend started to panic as she woke up fully. We both caught a glimpse of whatever the hell that thing was as it dashed into the woods nearby our home. Grabbing my trusty shotgun from beneath the bed, as well as a couple of rounds from the ammunition box that sits right next to it, I ran outside the room in my underwear and rounded the kitchen. The door was fully open. I'd forgotten to lock it when I originally saw that thing. Now I haven't seen it since. We still live in our cabin, but I've got about 40 sturdy locks on all of the main doors and windows in the house. I always check them at night. I also go to bed a little bit earlier than I used to, so I'm asleep when the freaks of night start to wake up. I've read a bunch of stories that I can compare to my story. I guess I saw what you call a skinwalker. I just know that I never want to see it again.
My grandfather told me a story once, as we sat around a campfire in his backyard. In the cool night of the Arizona desert, the horizon was clear, and each star twinkled in a purple sky, with a full flat moon hanging over the mountains. His voice was raspy and gravelly, the result of a lifetime of smoking cigars and drinking whiskey. The fire danced and shined across his dark, wide eyes as he settled into his seat, ready to tell his story. Way back when I was a boy about your age, I lived outside an Apache reservation with your great-grandfather. He had returned from the war and set about raising horses and cattle on an 100-acre ranch settled between a brambly mountainside with dirt good for growing thorn bush and not much else. One night, my mother was sick, and Pa and I took a trip downtown about 50 miles away, straight through a dry desert, over a washed-out creek and some old abandoned farmsteads. Pa and I were driving an old Ford pickup truck. I remember it was dark out, inky and thick, with only the lights of our old truck lighting up the road. I remember when the engine began to splutter, and the truck slowly had to stop. "God damn it," Pa said, guiding the Ford to the side of the road as it coasted to a halt. "Stay here, son," and he stepped out into the darkness, shutting the door with a heavy thud. My window was down, and the cool desert air was breezy and felt good on my hot face and neck. Pa was getting water from the back to cool the engine, and that's when I smelt it. Rotten eggs. Strange, I thought, to smell sulfur in the desert. My nose also picked up carrion, like one of those dead, bloated cattle that would drop from the heat and lay there until the crows pecked enough holes into the hide that the whole thing would explode. It stunk, and I gagged. My skin started to tingle too, and the back of my neck felt itchy, and my face started to get hot. The wind stopped blowing. Pa? No answer. My heart started beating, and I felt such a fear in me, in my bones and in my chest. Boy, I tell you, I've never felt fear like this. Not until Vietnam. Not until I saw men dying around me. I locked the door and reached over for my pa's door and saw a shadow bound across the road through both dim beams of light, across the partially opened domed hood. There was a creature. You have to understand, there were legends. Old legends. Older than the rock cairns out in the valleys. Older than the crazy horse, than Sitting Bull. Older than the Indian chiefs and their shamans. The Apache, the Hopi, the Cherokee, all of the old tribes and first people. They told tales and old stories about dark Indian magic. A deal made with the old spirits of blood sacrifice to gain power, old power, enough to fight each other, the Spanish, and later the white men that came for their lands and women. They called them Skinwalkers, shape changers, old warriors resurrected as skinless men, all sinew and muscle, walking on deer legs with the torso of a man and the head of a coyote, but messed up, with long, malformed snouts, teeth like a Bowie knife, long arms and standing 7 foot, even hunched over they'd gut the old cowboys and white riders. They'd run through bullets, sabers, part the Spanish armor as if it were potato sacks. They could also change their voice to match the person that you knew, or might know. That's what I saw. Big and fast, only for a second it ran across the road, and it turned, looked right at me in the cab, right into my eyes, and I swear it grinned at me. I sank into my seat in shock and fear, shaking. I knew death was near. The air was electric. I smelled ozone and brimstone. The air felt like right before when lightning comes and blows a tree into smithereens. I yelled for my pa, but no words came out, just a dry squeak. I was shaking as grandfather told his story. He was still here, so I know he lived, but the supernatural always fascinated me, and even now, I felt the force of his words. The real power of Skinwalkers was the trickery, sure. They could change their voices, but also their skin. That's why the gods took their hide, so that they could take others. Not for long, the legend says, maybe an hour, before the soul of the skin who they were wearing would come looking for their mortal shell before going to whatever hell awaited them. Though I think that getting skinned alive was hell enough. A minute passed in what felt like a lifetime. 1 second in 1,000 years. My father opened the door and I jerked my head to the left, putting my fists up to fend off an attack. "Son, it's me," my father said, before climbing into the cab. He grasped the steering wheel and pulled himself in, awkwardly jerking himself back into the seat. I cringed in the corner. I looked at him. I looked hard. "Boy, your great-grandfather was a good man. Treated me and my ma right. He fought the Nazis and saw the worst of the men in Poland when he freed all them camps. And now I was taking his measure. Is this my father? Do I make a run or do I die? Is this him or not? Let's go get that medicine for your ma." As he pulled the truck into gear and pulled it out onto the road, and our trip resumed. "I guess it was him after all," my grandfather said. "But how did you know? Was it because he said something about your mum?" "No, boy. I knew because out the window, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the beast running 50 miles an hour right next to the car, looking at me with those yellow eyes and a grinning mouth. I looked and saw it, hunched and angry, running next to us. My father kept his eyes on the road, locked straight forward. He said to me, "Son, don't look at it. Don't look at it." And that's how I knew.
Hi, I'm about to tell you a story that's absolutely true. My grandfather lived in Mighton, Utah, and he told stories about skinwalkers and how they could take form of any animal or anyone you knew. I asked him one day, "Did you ever meet one?" And he told me, yes. I asked him when. "A very long time ago, before you were even born, before your mother was born. It was when I was young and foolish. I went to the valley, the Skinwalker Valley. It's a valley where life never enters, not even the crows. The very guardians of death will never go there. They too fear the evil that lives out there." He continued with his story. "I went out there to show people that nothing evil existed in the valley, nothing but their fears, but I was wrong." He went on that he had gone to the Skinwalker Valley in his old red Ford truck to prove to everyone that what they thought they knew were just stories used to scare them. When he reached the valley, he remembered the grass was black, as if it had been burned and survived the fire. The trees looked dead, but were still alive. He told me he had seen a house not far from where he stood. It was an old house, and its roof was caved in. The door was gone, so he walked towards it, and there were strange marks on the side of the house. Animal skeletons were strewn all about the property, as if there were a sacred burial ground. Then he heard her, his grandmother. She had died a long time ago, but he heard her. The spirits were calling for him, for his life, for his skin, for his blood, and for his soul. They were the lost souls. They could change form from man to beast. They chased and scared him, and told him that they would never forget him. Whenever I visited my grandpa, he would show me something that was brand new, but had been broken the next day. These spirits would kill his animals, so he finally stopped keeping his dogs outside. It got to the point where I snapped at him, telling him that his stories were lies. I told him to prove it. He turned around, pulled his shirt up, and all I could do was gasp. I look at his back. It was torn here and there. Not one part of his back was unmarked. There were wide claw marks, too straight and too far apart to be made by any human. I was scared and started to cry. I remember my mother running to see what was the matter. She screamed and ranted at Grandpa as he told me. She screamed and ranted at Grandpa as she told me. She screamed and ranted at Grandpa as she held me. But he did nothing but stare at the field across the road from his house. She finally gave up and carried me inside. But as I looked over my mother's shoulder, I saw it. A large, black dog with white eyes. It was watching Grandpa, and he was watching it as if he was waiting for it to attack him. It never did. I never saw that dog again. My grandpa died 2 months later. The doctor said his heart gave out, but I knew that was a lie. His arm had fresh claw marks. That was 42 years ago. No one has ever believed me, but it's a true event, so I'll tell you that the world would know. Never look into a skinwalker's eyes. It will never forget you. If you do, sooner or later it will have your soul. You can fight and refuse to give in to a skinwalker's power. But if that's the case, then I hope you're not afraid to die.
It's an experience he had with a skinwalker on the Navajo reservation. When I was about 11 or 12, we lived in a small house made out of mud and stone, a lot like the house we have now. It was 2 of my brothers and I in the house at the time. Everybody else had gone to James Fest, and that left us to tend to the sheep. We were getting ready for bed when we suddenly heard the dogs going crazy outside. Thinking it was nothing more than coyotes howling in the distance, we just told them to be quiet. We began to drift off into sleep, and the dogs would not shut up. Somehow, I was able to go to sleep for a few hours. Then I woke up later into the night. It was very quiet and still in that house. save for my brother snoring and breathing. I realised soon that I needed to use the outhouse and woke up my brother to take me there. He teased me about being scared, which I certainly was. We went out with our flashlight to the outhouse. The dogs began with their crazed barking and started snarling. They were going from one place to the next, just rushing to the bushes. I was now waiting for my brother to come out of the outhouse as he went first. While waiting, I tried to follow the dogs with my flashlight. Suddenly, there was a very loud whine from one of the dogs. Then everything went quiet. It was really too quiet for that time of year. Not even the sheep were making noise. Suddenly, I heard a few of the dogs going completely mad by the truck. When I looked over, there was this man. He was unbelievably tall, leaning one arm on the cab roof of the truck. He was looking at the dogs a little, suddenly kicking one of them. They all scattered into different directions. The thing then looked up at me and I saw its face. It was a pure white face like a full moon, with two burning red eyes, a slight smile that was pure black. I couldn't move or make a sound. This thing, whatever it was, then began making very tall long strides towards me, until it finally towered over me. As soon as it approached me, all I could see was a colour of blood red. I kept getting deeper and deeper lost into its eyes. I could faintly hear my brother coming out of the outhouse. With this, the thing looked up at him. Reality came rushing back to me. I noticed that my brother was too distracted with his buckle to realise what was going on. I then realised that this thing had its horrible looking, long fingernails, just inches hovering above my head. Its skin was black ashy, and it smelled like a bloated dead animal in summer. I was still unable to move or speak. The Skinwalker began moving towards my brother now. Finally, noticing this, my brother became just as paralysed as I was. Closer and closer it drew, reaching an extended arm out towards my brother's head. Suddenly, something finally snapped in me. I became unbearably angry. I broke from my trance and lunged at the Skinwalker, raising my arms like a wild animal, baring my teeth at it. A growl came out that I knew I couldn't have made normally. I became more and more angry at the thing trying to hurt us. I kept that smile at first, but the angrier I got, the more my smile faded. Finally, with everything I had, I began to make this primal roar at it. It fell backwards and ran away into the night. The next morning, my family returned from the fest. After replaying the story to my parents, they quickly hired a medicine man. Thank you MortisMedia and SwampDweller for featuring on this video, my friends. Firstly, thank you to MortisMedia. He's the first narrator you can hear on this video. We're actually doing a collaboration right now, so this is only one half of our videos that we've done. Both of the videos are on Skinwalkers and he's uploading the other half of the videos to his channel, so make sure you go and check that out. I'll leave the link in the description and on screen, so make sure you go and check that out on his channel. He has a very good narrating voice and I strongly recommend you go and subscribe to him and check his stuff out. He's a very nice person and it is a pleasure as always working with you, my friend. And the other narrator you can hear in this video is SwampDweller. He's another one of my friends and again, he has a very good narration voice, so make sure you go and check out his videos. I'm actually also featured on a video he just uploaded that I'm going to put in the description too and also on screen. I'm currently working with SwampDweller and MortisMedia for future videos too, so make sure you say subscribe to me and turn on notifications to be notified for when I upload these. Thank you everyone. At the minute I'm still not 100%, so sorry if my voice doesn't sound normal in this. It's quite strained at the minute, but I'll live. So thank you everybody for watching. I'm going to be doing some merch stuff soon. I'm just in the negotiation phase of it at the minute, so it should be coming out sometime this month, so make sure you look out for that. And if you have any suggestions for things you'd like to see in the merch, leave that in the comments below. So thank you everybody, have a nice day and take care.